So Jake, haven't talked to you in a couple of hours. How are you doing?
Oh, outstanding, my friend. Hey, look, mad props, man. Again, I told your staff this when I was in the green room, but I understand the difficulty, the decision you made to move the conference virtual. You're obviously a thought leader in the industry. You jumped before others did, and for the public good. And hats off to you, man. I just cannot praise you enough for that.
Thank you so much. All right, well, I'm going to get out of here before I turn too red, blushing. With that, Jake, please, why don't you kick it off and let's close it out.
Yeah, rock on, man. This is great. My name is Jake Williams. I think most of you probably know me, but for those that don't, I'll quickly walk through here. This is, my third Wild West Hackfest. I managed to somehow miss the first one because I don't remember what prior commitment, something along those lines, but super thrilled to be here. And super thrilled to be closing out the conference, right? So this talk is actually the third in a trilogy of talks that I've given at Wild West Hackfest. The first one was all about privilege escalation on Linux. That was Deadwood. Deadwood 2018, Deadwood 2019. We had a chance to run through privilege escalation on Windows, and now we're doing hunting software vulnerabilities without reversing. And in fact, titled this talk before I even left Deadwood last year. And I'm so thrilled to be here, and thank everybody for attending here. I'm super excited to get through this. So that said, let's get rocking here. So who am I? For those that don't know me, I'm the founder and president of Rendition Infosec. I work with a little company called IONS. I'm on faculty over there. Former SANS instructor. I work a little bit with SANS still, but no longer on the instruction side. Formerly endorsed by the Shadow Brokers, right? If you don't know about that, just Google my name with the Shadow Brokers and you will see the grumble. But as a result of that, I can now confirm that I used to be an NSA hacker, a master CNE operator, and all that stuff. I dislike folks who call themselves thought leaders, right? I know I just called John one. That's not a knock on John. What that is basically a recognition that if you are calling yourself a thought leader, you're not. If someone else is calling you a thought leader, you probably are, right? That kind of thing, right? And then, of course, blockchain, freaking blockchain, right? Thankfully, we're nearing the end of that ridiculousness, or I feel like we're nearing the end of that. It's spun down a little bit, but alas, lots of folks needlessly adding that, distributed ledger technology and smart grid and the whole, you name it, all the places it doesn't need to be, right? So before we get going here, a little bit of an agenda, bug hunting, right? You can do it too. That's really the purpose of this talk, right? And in fact, John mentioned haven't talked to you in a couple hours, tongue in cheek, obviously. Before I came to give this talk, it's John's conference. I have great respect for John. I wanted to make sure, obviously, that I wasn't dropping anything here that he was uncomfortable with. We will go through a couple of O-days that the vendor has not patched, one of which the vendor is arguing with me about, which is not a good move, I think. But anyway, alas, wanted to make sure it was cool. One of the things that came out of it was like, well, how much work did you need to put into to get this? Question John asked, very responsibly, by the way, and said literally about 5 minutes for one of them. No special tooling, as it turns out, right? And so that was pretty much the point where like, oh yeah, done. It's just a go, right? So bug hunting, you can do it too, whether you have binary exploitation skills or not. That's kind of the purpose of the talk here, right? Then I have the why me, right? Wouldn't there already be a CVE, right? By the way, number of CVEs this guy has, big goose egg, right? I've lost count of the vulnerabilities, but we'll say it's multiples of triple digits. I've never submitted for a CVE, don't care to. Most of it's for client work anyway, and all that good stuff, right? Walk through some of the tools of the trade, what you're supposed to be looking for, and then we'll get into the fun part, case studies, show this stuff works, and then wrap it up. Now, look, I want to give a quick note here, right? None of the techniques in this presentation are original. I am standing on the shoulders of giants getting in here and giving this presentation. I've said this in all three now of my Wild West Hackfest talks. Again, standing on the shoulders of giants here, as everybody that's presented today has. I mean, unless you're like the guy who built the internet or Grace Hopper, you are very likely standing on the shoulders of giants as well. I'll tell you here, the vulnerabilities that we're going to disclose obviously are new, but the techniques are not, right? And the fact that the vulnerabilities are new tells me that people, by and large, aren't using these techniques, hence the reason for the talk, right? But I also know I've got a lot of haters out there. I throw this in here for two reasons. One, to give credit where credit's due. Tons of people have researched stuff like this, come up with great techniques, right? Invented stuff like the race condition, or as I like to call it, the Dale Earnhardt condition, right? Because I'm from backwoods Virginia and go Dale, right? I do want to walk through, though, how we kind of chain stuff together. But I do want to throw a thank you and a shout out to the people way smarter than me, the folks that came before me, the folks that paved the way for this talk. So Talk about bug hunting. You too can do bug hunting, right? It is not that hard. And we start getting into looking for vulnerabilities. Look, we're talking about not necessarily the kind of stuff that you'll find in Metasploit. It's already Metasploit, right? You don't need to go hunt that, right? And this is the stuff that separates your custom, vulnerabilities, the stuff that separates the Joes from the pros, or the pros from the Joes or the Jodies, whoever. We're not looking for buffer overflows. We're not looking for use after freeze. We're not looking for that level of stuff. And I'm not necessarily saying that these are somehow lesser vulnerabilities because it's not a sexy use after free. That's not at all what I want you to take away from this statement. We don't need to use fuzzing and binary techniques. That's what I want you to take away. I want you to take away here is that this is something you need zero assembly for. And honestly, let me go ahead and tell you that I'm going to show you one remote code execution vulnerability with system privileges, or administrative privileges, excuse me. But there's no separation really between admin and system anyway. And walk you through one of these before we're all done. I'll tell you that if you pointed me to use after free and a buffer overflow and that, I would use the vulnerability I found instead of any of those. Although I'm going to tell you those are way sexier. Mine's 100% reliable and will not crash will absolutely not crash the application. Right? So you don't need to use those techniques. That's the takeaway here. Right? Usually we're hunting for logic flaws, unquoted paths, bad permissions. By the way, hit the WWHF Hackfest talk from Deadwood last year. We cover a lot of unquoted path issues and bad permission issues. Now we're getting into this bad programming issue to kind of wrap up the trilogy. So why me? Why do you have to go hunt this stuff? You're a pen tester, you're a blue teamer, purple teamer, red teamer. I don't care what color. Right? Hopefully not a brown teamer, right? Whatever that means today. But alas, if it's vulnerable, wouldn't there already be a CVE? And the answer is meh. No. In point of fact, no, absolutely not. We find vulnerabilities all the time that don't have CVEs that we hope nobody else has found. We tend to notify vendors. But I'll tell you that not only does not every vuln discover get a CVE, but if you work consulting at all, like I do, like John does, you run into some really sketchy software out there, sketchy third-party software. And typically, when we get down to the root cause of, for instance, when you ask, why are you using this instead of, for instance, I don't know, SMSS or Tanium or insert vendor here, right? And I'm not saying that all those are great. I'm just going to go ahead and say that they are potentially safer. Let's go with that, right? Somebody's audited the code. I don't have any problem with you using third-party code that's maybe low density, but for goodness sakes, right? If they've got better licensing, more flexible models, you just like how it looks, you like how it works, you like the color scheme better, rock on. But do an audit for security, because at the end of the day, when you get the sketchy third-party software by Bubba, the COO's cousin, and I so wish I was making that up. The guy's name was not Bubba, but he was the chief ops officer's cousin, and it literally gave us keys to the kingdom across the enterprise. Listen, in reality, neither Bubba nor his cousin know how to code securely or evaluate programs for vulnerabilities. And I don't care whether or not, this whole security by obscurity thing is absolute madness. We know that doesn't work. We absolutely know it doesn't work. So we don't want Bubba or his cousin doing the code, or her cousin, whoever. It's not going to change the risk that nobody's done a security evaluation on it. Well, it doesn't change the outcome. Maybe it changes the risk, I guess. But if you're counting on security through obscurity to save you this talk, and honestly, the whole conference, the industry, if I'm going to get down to it, not for you. Go somewhere else. So let's talk about tools of the trade. And I've got a few of these right off the bat that I use. And I'm going to cover a few of these. I don't have time, unfortunately, to cover all of these. I'm just going to cover my biggest hits, the things that I use the most. But you'll notice here, there's some pretty stupid easy tools to use down here. Things like strings and SQLite database viewer. And I'm not saying here that, we're a little bit past the level where I'm like, oh yeah, I can comfortably teach my parents to do this afternoon. We're a little bit past that, but we're certainly not in the, hey, I need a fuzzing rig and, basically a degree in computer science, and I need to be able to read assembly. No, you know what? Forget that. I need to be able to look at the little green screen and be like, I see the girl in the red dress, right? Or the woman in the red dress. You don't have to be like that Matrix level Neo kind of thing going on there. Again, we're going to use tools like Redshot, Procmod, iCackles. And I got to tell you, man, after Shallow Hal, I cannot look at iCackles and not think about cankles again. I'm sorry. Now you hopefully now too have that stuck in your head. So again, we'll be kind of like bad association partners. There we go. I use a little bit of PowerShell here and there. SQLite database viewer, strings. Process Hacker is one of the most underrated tools. I'm going to walk you through this in just a moment here. It's one of the most underrated tools, bar none, in our industry. And I don't know why more people don't know about this tool. Now, If you're a SANS person, you've probably seen Jason Fawson. Jason Fawson, phenomenally smart dude. Alyssa Torres, another big process hacker champion, in the memory forensics course. But I'm just going to tell you that they both are big evangelists for process hacker. And Jason Fawson out on the SANS website, I sadly don't have a link to it in here, but he's got a whole presentation on, I think he calls it some exploratory surgery with process hacker. I mean, it's a free presentation. Go grab it and learn process hacker because it's an amazeballs level tool. And then finally, Microsoft Network Monitor. And notice here I didn't say Wireshark. I didn't say Wireshark. There's a reason for Microsoft Network Monitor. I'm going to cover that in a minute, but you should know I don't mean Wireshark. These two things are not interchangeable. Not in this case, at least. Generally, I want to say, by the way, too, Microsoft Network Monitor is a worse tool generally for packet capture. I use it for vulnerability identification, though, because it has a couple of superpowers, unfortunately, the Wireshark lacks, right? And that has to do with its tie into the operating system. I want to start out talking about Redshot. Redshot is an amazingly useful tool for snapshotting the registry and then comparing it to a snapshot taken later so that you can go find the changes. Now, you can also snapshot file system changes as well, right? So basically here, you'll notice that I've got in the, you'll notice here that I've got this little scan dir button set here. And so because I've got this checked, right, this little box here checked, because I've got that box checked, I'm able to go in and it scans the whole file system. Now, you should know that when you check that box, that makes Redshot take phenomenally longer. Also, you should know that you should have an SSD for this, right? And if your boss is like, no, it's desktop, you don't need an SSD, and even better, an NVMe, you want fast. Speed is the name of the game here because, even on a moderately sized VM, right? So moderately sized desktop VM. In fact, if you're familiar with IE User, you can see what I'm using here. This is actually the modern.ie VM. I use that for a lot of my vulnerability discovery because I basically, nobody argues with me like, Jake, you did something. I can literally point back to a public VM, right, that they can go as I'm basically for reproducing results. It's not one of these, well, that didn't work on my system and because it's configuration specific. Or when a vendor accuses me of modifying my configuration to make something exploitable, I'm like, negative, Ghost Rider, go download this VM. And again, if you're not familiar with modern.ie, that is the URL, you can go download virtual machines from modern.ie for browser testing. Now, what do you know? I always make sure to do browser testing there. So Microsoft, don't hit me here, right? I always do some browser testing anytime I download a VM from there because of course I do, right? I comply with licensing. But in the meantime, it shows me files that were added, files that were deleted, files that changed size or attributes, as well as registry keys and values that were modified, added, deleted, etc. It's a phenomenal tool for finding the differences in snapshots. And when I say snapshots here, again, basically meaning that I can see all the changes that a particular application made. I'm really concerned about this because sometimes they write really weird things into the registry. Now, if you're thinking like, but I don't want to compare snapshots, right? Good news, Procmod is the tool for you. Now, Procmod allows you to monitor file system registry changes, among other things, in real time. Now, I've had folks, when I've talked about this in the past in smaller venues, folks like Sysmon is definitely, I'm like, rock on, I hear it. I know what Sysmon is. I know what Sysmon does. It's not like I've been trapped in the industry here for, or trapped, basically like I went to sleep 10 years ago and just was pulled out of a medically induced coma or something and like still saying Procmod. There's a reason I'm using Procmod. It's because the additional noise that I get out of Sysmon doesn't markedly help me here. Also, by the way, that extra noise is why I'm still using Redshot here. I'm using both tools simultaneously. This is not an either or thing. This is a both thing. I launch Procmod. I have it not capturing. Then I launch Redshot. And then I get Redshot to take its first shot. Then I do the things that I turn on capturing in Procmod, do the things that I do, grab a second snapshot. Now, Procmod allows you, if you want to think about this, right? Redshot's a lot like comparing two satellite photographs to find changes. Very topically, there are some comparisons that were in the New York Times, I believe it was this morning, of Iran that apparently is digging mass graves. And so they're able to look at two satellite photographs and see the delta between those and kind of see what's going on and the changes. But we're not watching those in real time. Procmod is like a close-up, real-time video feed. So rock on here. I love the video feed. The problem here is there is a ton of background noise. Right now, a lot of people will tell me like, Jake, no, just filter on the one process that you need. And I'm like, neat, I do that, but I want to capture everything. Also, by the way, there's all kinds of extra stuff in other processes that's kicked off by my process that's interesting. And Anyway, the short of it is I use Procmod and Redshot. Redshot gives me a very consolidated view of all the changes that were made, whereas Procmod shows me all the changes as they're happening. I'm using both tools. Now, in the vulnerabilities that you're going to see as we talk about the case studies today, what you're going to see there is going to be Procmod output, but I want you to know that in one of those cases, I really got my initial lead via Redshot. Another tool, by the way, too, here, this is one of my go-tos, right? Operation is process create. This is a good start for me here because I filter by operation. A lot of people like filter by process, and they filter by the process, and they've got 10,000 lines, or in one case that I was working with here, one of the two applications, when I filtered just by process, I think I had 120,000 lines for about 3 minutes of activity. It's a very busy process. Rock on. What I did here is I strategically used filtering to get me to where I wanted to go. I can't look through 100. I can't even look through 1,000 lines. I'm going to be straight up and tell you. If you give me 1,000 lines of Procmod output, I may miss the golden nugget in that poop pile because it's too much data and I'm being overrun by the data here. So I'm really surgical about the basically about the filters that I create. And this is one that I tend to like is process create. Let's talk about process hacker. Process hacker does a lot of stuff. It shows the relationship between processes, services that are running, dlls that are loaded, and other information. But that's not my favorite feature here. It is for other stuff. For other stuff, I absolutely love it for that. But I have to tell you, my favorite feature in this scenario is the ability to search memory of a running process and edit it on the fly. Now, a lot of folks are like, Jake, why would you do that? That's ridiculous, right? Why are you going to go edit the memory of a running process? You said no reversing. You're right, no reversing. What I do is I search for strings inside of memory, and then I go surgically replace, like let's say, for instance, a callback domain, and I want to see, can I force it to go somewhere else? And I'll simply change the callback domain in the strings in memory and go. And I love being able to do this for science. Science, right? We all know about this, but look, when we get down to the whole science thing, what am I looking at here? I'm looking here at the ability to go in and start looking at the DLLs that are present. The DLLs that are present tell me quite a bit about the program itself. You might infer that because this is in program files x86, you might infer that indeed it is a x86 versus an x64 program. And I tell you, be like right like 99% of the time. In that case, the reverse is not true. A lot of 32-bit applications install themselves into the 64-bit program files folder. And oftentimes there are both 32 and 64-bit components in the same program, in which case it really should go in the program files folder. When I'm looking at a particular application while running, though, if I take a look at the modules, and Process Hacker shows this to you on the General tab as well, but if I look at the modules and I see this WOW 64, WOW stands for Windows on Windows, right? And the 64-bit here means I'm looking at a 32-bit process running in the emulation subsystem on 64-bit Windows. So that's what that tells me there effectively. And this is where things get amazeballs, right? Because I can go over to the memory tab. I can go find particular memory, and hidden behind here, by the way, there's basically a tab to go look for string. So if you know what string you're looking for, you just fire up the strings tab. It shows you the offset. Then you double click on the appropriate address there or the appropriate range. And literally, you can now have a live hex editor into memory on your system. Now, with great power comes great responsibility. I demonstrate in practically every class that I teach, basically breaking processes by doing this. Because let's be fair, it is kind of fun. I enjoy it. Students enjoy it. Done. And then finally, Microsoft Network Monitor. This is a thing of absolute beauty. It is a now deprecated tool, but it allows you to watch traffic in real time and tie networking to individual processes. And I don't know if you're watching here, right? But here in the process name field, what we have here effectively is basically the process name that generated the traffic. This is the thing you don't get with the regular packet capture data, right? So if you have just a regular PCAP, if you just fire up Wireshark, what you're dealing with now is you only get this data. You don't get the more important, I would say, more important data, the process that is that's actually creating it. That's huge for me because if I see a connection, I've done this with Wireshark in the past, right? Before somebody introduced this to me 10 years ago, and I'll tell you that when I used to use Wireshark, I would see like a communication. I'd be like, oh man, I wonder, is that my process? Is that the one I'm hunting, right? And I didn't know, so then I'm trying to like rinse, lather, repeat, because I'm trying not to reverse engineer. I certainly do, but if I can avoid it, why worry about that, right? So this is so much better because I get a chance, I can filter against only a specific process, and it's very, very useful. By the way, even though it's deprecated, you can still download it and still runs just fine on Windows 10. I've got it running on 1909 right now. It runs just fine. couldn't be happier. And we'll continue to keep running it on 1909 and done. But what I'll mention here is that there is also a not deprecated version, NetSh with the trace filter that creates what they call ETL files. And these ETL, they're event trace logs. Basically, with those, you can still capture all this data, but you can't watch it in real time. And I'm not a delayed gratification guy. I want to see this in real time. And so I'm far less likely to basically use Wireshark than this, right? So take nothing else away from this talk. Process Hacker and Netmon are awesome tools. If you don't have those in your bug hunting arsenal, put them in your bug hunting arsenal. Let's talk about what to look for. First off, I want to set up targets of opportunity here. Process calls. If the program is creating a process, what is the path that's fully qualified? Was the path fully qualified? Our paths of spaces quoted. Mark Baggett, one of the smartest men I know, introduced me, 10, I can't even remember, years ago. It's been a lot of years, sadly. And he introduced me to the whole idea of basically creating a file called program.exe. And you just put this in the root of your C drive, literally, C program.exe. This is such a problem, Microsoft actually warned you about it, right? They're like, whoa. Did you seriously just create program.exe? They're like, because that's probably malware, right? They actually have a pop-up about this. Now, incidentally, the pop-up, you can click the don't show me this again. If you have permissions to write program.exe, you have permissions to write the registry key that says don't show me this again. We're not going to talk about that little logic kerfuffle, right? But whatever. What I'm looking for here, when we start looking at creating a process, I can filter on create process. I definitely can. You saw that earlier. I'll show you that again as we progress. But the process creation calls are showing me the successful process creation calls. What I'm looking for here first, right, is I'm looking for, because as you tell Windows, create process. If I say C, program files, common files, let's call it, I don't know, Jake, and then Jake.exe, the first thing that create process call is going to do, it's going to look for a program.exe, because program files, if it's unquoted, has a space. Then it's going to say program files and then common files. Let's say program files common.exe. This is all happening without the developer's interaction. And so what I'm looking for here then, because I won't see a failed process create call, the call will eventually be successful if the program is there. What I want to know is, basically, did we have an unquoted path? And if so, would we have looked for things other places? In those cases, what we're looking for here then is a create file call. Now, create file in Windows and create anything in Windows really means create or open. Now, there are flags that you can set where like only create, don't open it if it already exists. But really, it's create or open. And so here we're saying create file, and I'm looking for is not successful, meaning that Windows tried to find something that ends with exe, so an executable. Now, in this case, I filtered it because all the process names that I was interested in, they all begin with the letters ASC. So this was an easy one for me to do. But with ASC here, basically, I'm looking for a create file call that is not successful that ends with exe, because, again, they're looking to open this up. And what I'm looking for here are where else might we have something. Now, I want to mention here, too, by the way, in fact, you'll see an example of this in a few minutes. It's not just stuff with spaces and unquoted paths. We also run into problems with basically when the path is not fully qualified. They're going to walk through, Windows is going to walk through all the things in the path variable looking for the executable in those locations. And again, it's not going to find them. If you can write to anywhere in the path variable, you win. New services this is another big one. Redshot helps me find new services, and I love it. Odd directories. I want to look at DLL path hijacking opportunities. We talked about that last year in Deadwood. There's also other material that I've got out online about DLL path hijacking vulnerabilities. Give a whole presentation on it at B-Sides Augusta a couple years ago. Process Hacker in the background, though, is awesome because instead of me having to watch this stuff in real time or, inside of Procmod or see it later, I literally just minimize Process Hacker and it pops up a little tooltip and it's like, hey, this service was just created. Did you want to know about that? And I'm like, of course I did. That's why you're running in the background kind of thing, right? So Process Hacker, again, for the win. Absolutely loving Process Hacker. Now, bad file permissions. If you were at Deadwood last year, you've already heard all about bad file permissions. Gosh, that was what? Probably 25% of the talk? I don't know, something like that. It was a big piece because it's a big problem. A lot of installers replicate the permissions of the original directory on the machine where it was packaged. Some of them just inherit from the parent directory. That latter one here, inheriting, this is what you're supposed to do. This here, replicating the permissions, that is a bad plan. probably is a bad plan, often ends up being a bad plan. If we have less secure permissions in the build machine, those can be propagated to basically their targets after installation. Now, I'm not going to cover all this again because it's already covered and you can go see that. The link here is in the slides. By the way, these slides are going to get posted on Twitter within whatever of me shutting up. I'll tweet out the link. I'm Malware Jake on Twitter. If you don't follow me already, just monitor that or the Rendition Infosec account, and I'm sure we'll retweet it from there too. One other target of opportunity, insecure updates. So we want to examine the network traffic that's being generated by our target application. I'm going to look at this with Network Monitor. I'm going to check for, and this is my go-to list here, is the update being done over HTTPS? A lot of people are like, oh, it's HTTPS, so we're done. I'm like, no, you're not. No, we're not done yet. If it is, my next check is the HTTPS certificate being pinned? Meaning, if the certificate isn't being pinned, what I end up with here effectively is I have the opportunity to intercept. I can man in the middle and I can shove an executable potentially, back to you that is basically we're passing the HTTPS check. In some cases, it's not even checking the certificate principal or any of that. Sometimes I self-sign a certificate with all the same information, and that works. You name it. Be creative here. Again, some of this benefits from a reverse engineer, but you can test all this manually with no reversing required. Just a little bit of creativity. Next thing I'll do is I'll check to see is the update signed. So you downloaded an update, but you haven't installed it yet. I'm going to go swap that bad boy out and see if you run my executable. And if you will, I know then if I have an unsigned, basically an unsigned, I know that you're not signature validating. Even if you sign the update, you'll process my unsigned app. Great. And then even if it was signed, how's that signature being validated, right? I can use OpenSSL and I can use that to go OpenSSL to generate a cert, and then sign tool from Microsoft to very easily sign the executable. I want to know how is it being validated. The right way to do this, by the way, or the best way, most secure way, is to look at the specific certificate fingerprint. That's the right way. You tell me what a lot of folks do. They parse the certificate. They don't even check to see the signature is correct, by the way. In a lot of cases, they parse the certificate and they check to see is the principal name mine. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put an X over here as bad, but I want to kind of throw out here that doing the certificate fingerprint is less flexible because as I go update my certificate, every certificate should expire. Definitely the Authenticode ones do. And if I'm only going to trust a particular certificate fingerprint and I don't have my new cert yet, let's say I distribute software and a year later I need to I need to distribute an update. But 9 months after that, 9 months after I'd pushed the original software, my certificate expired and I needed to get a new certificate. I don't have the new fingerprint, right? So how do we deal with that? Well, lots of folks think ahead around that, or they get bit by that, whatever the case is, and alas, they're like, I'll just check the principal name. Well, listen, the principal name, I can create self-signed certificates with any principal name. Now, I'm not going to tell you that some vendors, Kaspersky, have fallen victim to this in the past. I'm definitely not going to tell you that, right? But if I were to tell you that, you probably wouldn't be surprised. Now, in a specific case, when I said, by the way, kind of subliminal man, Kaspersky there, in their case, it was actually basically it was their HTTPS man in the middle so we can monitor your browser for totally good reasons, of course, stuff there, right? So that was it. It wasn't an update for the software, but I can tell you that a lot of software updates do the same thing. They literally look at the certificate and they say, oh, I recognize you, right? Because the principal name is correct. And they don't even validate that it's even a legitimate certificate. So definitely be on the lookout for that. That's another great way to get in and cause some ponage. Let's get into some case studies because InfoSec needs more Michael Bay moments. Too many of our talks, we do a lot of theory and not a lot else. And sure enough, my explosions didn't go off there. They just went to like nothing. So that sucks, right? I actually had explosions that were supposed to, whatever. Anyway, let's do some advanced SystemCare here. I'd never heard of this application. By the way, lest someone think that I am picking on apps, I'm absolutely not. I went to a site called Major Geeks. If you're not familiar with Major Geeks, they are an awesome project by which they go and find software that they confirm is spyware free, and they distribute it to, or basically where they can distribute it. They have some links too that they've confirmed are spyware free, but where they can, basically, or adware, spyware, etc., where they can, they host that on their own site, and then they let basically we'll have folks download from there. A lot of elderly and folks that are less computer sophisticated use this. I believe it actually started when the dudes, run by a husband-wife pair, but when the dudes, elderly whoever's, called them and said, hey, I downloaded the software and then I got infected and I just felt bad for them. That sucked. So what do we think about this? This is interesting. We went in. Oh, actually, before I gave the plug for Major Geeks and then I lost track there. Called up my ADHD. Anyway, as far as the apps that we're going to look at today, I went to Major Geeks and I went to like utilities, and because utilities tend to start things like services, and I wanted stuff that wasn't just like, by the way, too, if you go look at regular user applications, it's a absolute poop show out there. I actually wanted stuff that was going to run in an elevated context. It wasn't stuff that, don't get me wrong, I'll take code execution any day of the week, but code execution in elevated context already just sounds cooler. This advanced SystemCare is one of these applications. When I went to utilities, I sorted by date, and I said, hey, show me the new stuff, right? Because I didn't want to be accused of providing you examples of stuff that was like 10 years old. The oldest thing that I downloaded was built in like the middle of February. So this is all up to date software, with up-to-date versioning and all that. Advanced SystemCare is still not answered my email. Sucks to be them. At least I didn't argue in the email, so I guess maybe they're ahead. I'm not sure whether, whatever. Anyway, basically it promises to clean your system of unwanted files and registry keys. And I'm going to go ahead and throw out here and say that this now is one of my unwanted files in general. Advanced SystemCare definitely falls into that space. We fire up Procmod and I start looking at process create. And right off the bat, I see sketch tasks. Now, if you're not familiar with sketch tasks, you probably should be. I'm also going to mention here, if you are one of our blue team folks, now I don't know who's online here, obviously, but in Deadwood last year, we had way more blue team folks there, honestly, than red team. And I'll just mention here that when you see processes kicking off from syswow64, this is a huge thing to look for in your logs. And the reason for this is that a lot of third-party apps, the vulnerable stuff that gets exploited, a lot of that is a preponderance of it is still x86. And when they call a program without the path, when they say fire up sketch tasks, it goes and grabs it from syswow64, the 32-bit directory, instead of system32, the 64-bit directory. This right here, to me, first off, if I'm a blue teamer, this says something very, very special. I should have changed the pen color to blue here before I did that. You'll have to forgive me here. Let's see if we can get a blue up here. There we go, right? So as a blue teamer, this scares me, right? This says I probably have exploitation someplace, and why is this thing calling? Now, I say exploitation someplace. Obviously, it's a legitimate application. It's doing it, but it's something you want to pay attention to because by and large, attackers compromise these third-party apps, and when they do, they get 32-bit 32-bit environment, and then when they call and say, run me a command prompt, it's syswow64 cmd.exe. When I see this as a red teamer, and I'd have drawn a red and a blue box around here regardless, right? When I see it as a red teamer, what I'm thinking immediately is they just called something without a path. Now that immediately for me has my little lizard brain going and thinking, But immediately I start looking at this. What is this? What is ASC? Well, ASC, Advanced SystemCare. ASC skip UAC IE user. Well, IE user is my username. That's cool. What is skip UAC? It turns out here that Advanced SystemCare is writing a task and then executing the task. My friends, do you know what this is when you write a task and then execute a task? This is what I like to call a zoom or a Dale Earnhardt condition, a race condition. They are writing the task and then they are executing said task. By the way, I did a little bit of testing here, and not only can you win that race that they are running here, you can also, and by the way, we're skipping UAC. There's a reason for that. That's because it's running an elevated context. I'm super happy about that. And so if I come back here and I win that race, that's cool. Turns out you can also create the task ahead of time, which is another really neat thing to go do, right? Because if you are a regular user on the box, there's nothing that prevents you from scheduling a task of the name of another user on the box who might also go run Advanced SystemCare later in an elevated context, and woohoo, right? You don't have to be elevated to go write the task in the first place, right? It's a picture here on a multi-user machine, and you've got stuff set up and game on, right? So you then write the task for the other user. The other user later, when they go run this, runs your task instead of the task that ASC was going to write. But wait, there's more, because they call my friend NetSh. Now, if you were at Deadwood last year, you know I talked about my go-to binary for this is NetSh. It's always NetSh. I don't know what it is about network. Actually, I do know what it is, but that's not important for this. Networking APIs are a pain in the butt. And as a result of networking APIs being a pain in the butt, what we see a lot of the time is we see developers calling NetSh to go get information instead of calling the APIs. This is generally not a winning move. Generally not a winning move. Can anybody tell me, sadly, I'm not logged into Discord, so I'm not going to be able to see this, but I'm sure John is monitoring Discord. Does anybody see the vulnerability here before I disclose it? Let me see what the problem is. There's a huge problem here. It's the same problem that we haven't confirmed from the last one. Notice here it shows the path. It says, hey, here's what actually ran. It's system32 NetSh. And I'm like, woohoo, neat. All right, but here's the command line. And the thing that's missing here is the C Windows. And I'm not going to write all this out because it sucks to draw with a mouse like this. It's a C Windows system32 NetSh. And what this means is you now have a process that is running in an elevated context, calling NetSh and just hoping it finds it in the right place. This is not something you want. This is bad, bad, bad. Now, I am certain that when Advanced SystemCare finally answers my email, the developer will argue with me, like many have before, that this is not bad. And it's not bad on their machines because nobody can write anywhere in the path for them. And they don't have, if you were my Deadwood talk last year, we talked all about the ability to go add files, the add file permission in basically an NTFS. And that's set on a lot of program files directories. It's also set by default on the root of your drives, in which case if somebody does a non-standard installation and installs this outside of program files, they very likely have the add files permission, which means I can add a NetSh. And what do you know? The first path that's called, the first place that they look for NetSh, well, yeah, what are the odds again, is in the program directory where Advanced SystemCare is running from. Again, not a winning move here, right? So again, here we are not doing any vulnerability hunting, or sorry, not doing any reversing, and yet now we're up to 2 vulnerabilities in Advanced SystemCare, and here we're looking at about 30 minutes in. So about counting the time to install, about 30 minutes in. And if you needed to know for sure that this was really happening, here you can see it happening. So notice here, we have the calls for create files. And again, this package installer inherits permission. So I do want to give them props. Mom said, if you can't say anything nice about somebody, don't say anything at all. So I'm going to say something nice. I'm going to say at least they did that right. I'm happy that they did that right. But notice here again, you can see very clearly that NetSh, they looked for it here. They just didn't find it. If they find it here, they will execute it. I can tell you this categorically because, well, I have code execution. So game on, right? Also, again, if you go install this in the root of your drive, again, by default, instead of the program files directory, by default, it's going to inherit those permissions again as well. Remember, it inherits permissions, and the inherited permission allows you to add files and folders. Ugh. And then I'm down to what are these, right? Now, sketch tasks, you already know about sketch tasks. We already had a race condition here. You have the double problem there. Same deal. I don't even know what these are. I didn't have time to go find these. What I am going to do is I am going to publish links on Major Geeks. Again, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll see this here very quickly. And I'll publish links so you can go download these and play at home, right? One of the things that separates Wild West Hackfest from a lot of conferences, again, we're virtual this year, so a little bit less than I say this year, this time around, so a little bit less, hands-on than we're used to. But I mean, it is a very hands-on conference, and I have to give John and his team mad props for that because, man, it is just wow. And I want to make sure here that I'm not just like throwing a bunch of stuff out where folks are like, well, that's neat. How do I do that? I'm going to send you links to the installers, and if somebody takes them down, I'll just post them somewhere else. Alas, meaning like if Major Geeks or somebody else forces them to take them down, maybe we'll BitTorrent those. I don't know, something to make sure that those are still out here so that you too can go work through this after you download a VM from modern.ie. That said, as we start getting into a little bit more, you see sketch tasks, and then this one. I don't even know what this hot mess of madness is over here, but again, and I don't want to use the words where there's smoke, there's fire. But can we all agree that when you see just weirdness, like stupid, weird, what the deuce is that weirdness, that maybe there might be structurally underlying problems with like for instance, if you were going to go buy a house, right? I may not be a home inspector, and I may not be a foundation inspector. I certainly am not. But if I, for instance, walked in and I saw the light switches installed sideways, and I saw a ceiling fan that was supposed to have 5 blades that had 4 blades, I might assume that there's a lot of stuff I can't see that's also effed up. And I'm just going to go ahead and tell you here, I see some stuff that concerns me just a wee bit. And I'll also say I am confident there's a lot of stuff left to find in advanced SystemCare. But if anybody's keeping track at home, that is, I don't want to play like the count, the count from Sesame Street here, but that's three vulnerabilities in literally an hour. Seriously, it was in the space of an hour that we discovered the sketch task injection. We discovered the NetSh injection, as well as the race condition with sketch tasks as well. So again, coming back to sketch tasks, these are not the sketch tasks we're looking for. And it's not just one sketch task. That's the problem. Like when I talk about like people screwing stuff up, they do it again and again and again. Event Sentry. This one is the one that John and I had a little bit deeper conversation about, because while he and I had never heard of advanced SystemCare, we both know this one. And I want to tell you, there's plenty left to find in Event Sentry. I'm just showing some of the greatest hits here. There's obvious lack of an SDLC here. I mentioned before, I don't care about CVEs, but if you want one, download Event Sentry. Anyway, where there's smoke, man, there's just fire. And I started up here, and I have to tell you, my blood ran cold. My blood ran cold because I started installing this, and it called Reg not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 9 total times. I have 7 of them up there, and there's another 2 that happened later. 9 total times it called during installation. That's absolutely nuts. And then I thought immediately, like, woohoo, trusted installer permissions for the win. And then I fired up, and I found out that no, I only get admin permissions, right? I'm only getting admin permissions. But earlier today, after seeing somebody coin the term disaster Voltron for all the stuff that's coming together, with this stuff going on now, they called kind of a response to this disaster Voltron, and I said, that's it. I'm naming a vulnerability disaster Voltron, and this is the one, right? Reg.exe being called without a path from the downloads directory. This is, my friends, by the way, is remote code execution. I had to fight with the vendor about this one as well. And I said, hey guys, like if an attacker convinces a user to download reg.exe malware named reg.exe first, and then downloads your installer, if they're in the same directory, that's where it's going to run from. And they're like, oh, that's no problem. We'll go ahead and hard code the path. That should be easy enough to do. And I'm like, no, how about using the API? Literally, there's an API for this. Don't call reg.exe, right? I haven't even gotten into some of the other stuff. Stop calling external commands. You don't need to. Your programmers freaking program. I don't even know what this is. I sent this to John yesterday, and what I got back was a confused what in all caps. After I texted him this, in the immortal words of Ron Burgundy, I'm not even mad. That's just amazing, right? What is this? Well, it turns out that there's actually an Event Sentry folder inside of System32 somehow, and we think, based on some other commands that we see fired, that they are caching PNGs for some reason. I'm not sure what that is, and then deleting those. Now, this doesn't do anything, thankfully, right? But I'm still blown away. Like, what is this? And I was like, what are those kind of thing? I don't even know what this is. So I'm just going to skip this and keep right on going. Hint, hint. There's a lot of other stuff here that you could probably find a vuln in as well. My last email to them, when we were arguing, I said, listen, guys, I'm done. Just so you know, just so you know, there's you probably need an SDLC and a code review. This is the last vuln I'm sending to you, and there are definitely others, and I'm sure people will be looking for them. So alas. Then I started looking here, and I'm like, well, this isn't very fun, but what madness is this? So regedit.exe, and I'm like, regedit. And you can see, like, they're calling it from looking for it from all over. And by the way, here too, if you're not familiar with this, I tried to see if I could get cool stealthy persistence with Hyper-V. The vmms.exe is a Hyper-V process. I tried to see if I could get cool stealthy persistence. It is checking for the presence of it, but it doesn't execute it, right? I was like, they can't be dumb enough to try to execute it. And sure enough, they're not. So game on. Mom said if you have to say something nice.
I got to ask, though, did you ever find out why they were checking for the presence of it?
Well, can I say yes and no? So the yes is yes, but it required reverse engineering, and that's not that my talk explicitly said we wouldn't do that. But the short of it is, seriously, on the yes side, it's because they're literally using that to determine if they're in a hypervisor, which I don't understand. That I'm beyond the why. I didn't chase down that rabbit hole, but they have a hypervisor check.
Okay. Well, all right then. Carry on.
That's where I'm at. My guess, John, honestly, is that they're setting some licensing flag. Again, just from a timing and I didn't really care anymore standpoint, I didn't chase down what they're doing with it afterwards, but it is definitely a hypervisor check. And then you get to this. I thought originally Regedit.exe was not a lot of fun, but it is a lot of fun because you start running into stuff like this. Now, they use Regedit.exe a lot. Now, again, there's an API for this. You don't need to use Regedit.exe to go set registry keys and values, but they do. They're cool with that. And so here we go. Now, if you're playing along at home here, what is this? Well, okay, I know it's %temp%. I got that, right? The problem here, of course, there's an obvious Dale Earnhardt condition here. If %temp is writable, right, I have bad news for you. And by the way, by default, C Windows temp is absolutely writable. You can't list all the files in it, right? But you can add files to it. And oh, buddy, you can add files to it. And I'm just going to leave it there. And this, by the way, oh yeah, it does show. I was going to say, did I somehow leave that off? This is Event Sentry SVC x64.exe running in the context of local system. And I'm not going to tell you that that's the time to get up and dance a jig. If you can go ahead and add registry keys, right, and values, this is code execution / privilege, I guess privilege escalation in this case. We'll call the reg.exe code execution. Actually, John, how are you with this? What would you call this? You go with code execution or privilege escalation here?
Anytime I get into situations like this, I just say, why not both?
Why not both? There you go. I like it. You know, here I think privilege escalation, because I already have to be on the box to affect change here, and I have to be active on the box to affect change at the time, so I feel much like priv-esc. I'm going to close this out here, this case study, saying don't argue with researchers, right? Because they literally, when I sent this in, they sent me this response back. And I normally don't crap on researchers, or sorry, crap on vendors here, but I'm going to here. Because when they kick over and they're like, all registry files should only be created in directories that are not accessible to regular user accounts. I agree. I 100% agree. Like, definitely agree. But you're wrong. You're still doing it. Like, I'm not going to call this thing a dumpster fire. I'm not going to tell you to uninstall Event Sentry if you haven't. What I will say is that if you are running Event Sentry today, as unfortunately a couple of my customers are, what I'm going to tell you is that any third-party software that you allow to run on your systems, and definitely third-party software that you allow to run on your systems with elevated permissions, you have got to do a security assessment on it because, again, my total time on target for Event Sentry is just over an hour, and that is confirming findings after they argued with me about this. That the original, the reg.exe, were sub 15 minutes on target. A couple of closing thoughts. Wow, I left other closing thoughts in there. My missing slide of the week. Okay, look, closing thoughts. Don't argue with, you know what, forget it. I'm going to drop it over here. My bad here on leaving the wrong slide in the, I don't know how that's there, but whatever. Look, my closing thoughts, no, you know what, I'm going to back up because that gets confusing. Closing thoughts, do security assessment, right? That's it, on third-party software. Second piece, this is not as hard as a lot of people make it out to be. A lot of the folks that'll get up in front of you are like, I have 50 CVEs, and they're like, worship me kind of thing. They may be absolute rocket scientists, they may be gods of exploitation, but maybe not. This stuff isn't that hard. You can do it too. Again, just use the techniques that we did or that we showed you here, and you too can rock this. John, hand it back over to you, man.
Yeah, and I think we're going to have some questions coming in because, of course, we are. But a couple of quick notes on this that I think are really, really key. You and I have talked about this, and I'm not going to get into previous lives for you and me. This should be a class, right? Like, yes. I think that people look at all exploitation as like super advanced hacking class stuff. And honestly, you talk about the sniff test. If you're a systems administrator, or if you're a security professional who's also a systems administrator, there needs to be a class for you just to go through and say, okay, yeah, this is absolutely a complete piece of garbage software. We're not going to put it in our environment without getting to the point of actually doing fuzzing. So this is without question a class, and it kind of gets in that question of, is this type of exploitation, does it have to be something that's just for the super elite, or can this be the fire that's brought down the mountain from Prometheus? And I really think there's a ton of things that you can find without going all the way to getting shell that you don't need to go to shell as well.
Well, I think demonstrably, right? I mean, that's what we're looking at here. It's a case study of that. And that's why, I talked to you about this back at Deadwood. That's why I want to put this talk together and kind of close that trilogy of like not leet stuff, right? And, you know, at Deadwood, I kind of gave the example there, you know, where I said, look, I feel stupid every time I get up and give a talk where I feel like somebody's going to judge me for not dropping an O-Day. I didn't say that here because we did. but not being like the super elite hacksaw. But to the point of it needing to be a class, yeah, definitely. I'm there. We actually are putting one together on this rendition, and we'll be offering it likely online and in person. I would say by 1 June, no doubt. With stuff slowing down.
Can we just say it's going to be running at Deadwood? If I can just confirm it, we got a bunch of people that are asking for the class right now. You guys want to come on at Deadwood and run it?
Hey, winning. Definitely. Yes.
Right. So the first approved training class for Wild West Hacking Fest in Deadwood is this class. By the way, I have a handful of things I'd like to throw your way as well. You talked about kind of the elite people, and I think that was a really big concern in the community for a long time, years ago, and it kind of went away, but it feels in some ways like it's back. I've been in conversations with people, and because I'm old, they tolerate me. But I've seen people literally do the CVE thing. It's like, well, how many CVEs have you done? It's like, it seems like it's a whole nother way of trying to develop street cred, I guess, that's unnecessary and not helpful.
Can I offer a note on that? Kind of just an observation. Yeah. One, I mean, man, first off, you and I both know it's a phallic measuring contest, right?
Every time.
And sadly, we've both been around long enough that we've seen it ebb and flow, as you really pointed out. I'm kind of seeing a resurgence in it, but by and large, that resurgence in the whole, the phallic measuring contest, you look around at the folks who have been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and we're over it, right? But I think there's a lot of folks that are, coming into the field that are trying to plant their flag and be like, hey, I wasn't an OG, but, I'm here now. And those are the folks that I see more than any, we talk a lot about gatekeeping and InfoSec. Those are the people, sadly, these people that are kind of in that 3 to 5 year range where it's like, I feel like I'm not a noob, and in order to prove that, I'm going to make other people feel like a noob. I don't know. It's something I've observed, and if you're one of those people, please stop it.
Yeah, and I think that there's so many other ways that you can develop really good cred in the community that are not exploit related. I kind of think about, there's some people on Twitter that get attacked because they're quote unquote not technical enough, and just kind of throwing some stuff around. I remember Malware Unicorn was doing some videos explaining some basic concepts, and there were people that immediately crapped on her for the videos that she did. And anybody that knows her knows that she's incredibly competent and very, 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 very deeply technical. Jason Street, there were some people that were calling him out. And I think that's kind of the main thing that's got to stop. Trying to call people out because they aren't in your specific clubhouse is totally and completely garbage. And I'd like to say, places like Wild West Hacking Fest, we just don't have a time for it, and we don't want to deal with that garbage at all.
Now, amen to that, brother. Amanda's amazing. Jason's amazing. And we keep listing names off here of people that have been attacked for, quote, lack of exploits, lack of vulnerabilities. But I mean, go Google me, man. I have 0 CVEs. 0.
Yeah. I'm in the 0 CVE club. I think somebody once called me on that, and I was like, well, let's go ahead and let's talk about security researchers and how many of them are students of mine, or Ed Scotus's, or Jake's. Sometimes he may not be the person coming up with that stuff, but you're the conduit that gets people to where they need to go. And I think that that's important as well.
Amen.
So, and I don't know about you, but seriously, and especially, and I think we've talked about this, I think Rendition and BHIS have very similar views on this. Working with companies to actually get to the point where you get a CVE is totally incomplete. It's a total time suck, and it's just absolute miserable hell. Working with Oracle is probably one of the most painful experiences that we have ever had. So what we do now is we hand it over to the customers, and it's up to the customers to actually relay that through, because I just don't want to deal with that. It's just too difficult and so much
Definitely,
time.
And then they get the cease and desist instead of you, right? That's the great part, right? So let Oracle send them the cease and desist.
Yep. And my favorite story, and it's not even my story, it's actually Kelsey's, and Kelsey should come on and do this, but she found some vulnerabilities with some Oracle product. This is right after what was her name? The lady that was the CISO at Oracle was like, don't pen test our products because we're so much better at it than you are. Found a bunch of SQL injection and cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, and she sent it in, working with the customer, and Oracle responded back something like, insufficient details to verify this particular vulnerability. Please provide additional details. And we sent full packet captures, insufficient details. Please provide more details to verify this. Sent packet captures and burp suite state information with screenshots and arrows. Came back, insufficient details to document and verify that this. They were just basically running you through the ringer until the point that she just kept on hitting resend with all the stuff, and they finally started working with us. But even after that, it took months for it to actually get addressed. And I really understand kind of the full disclosure movement. And I know that some of you I know that some of you are going to say what Jake did here was irresponsible. He should have done responsible disclosure. And I want to be honest to you that responsible disclosure, by and large, is something that's created by the vendors so that they can control the narrative about how they address vulnerabilities. If you work with them and you go through all the hoops, you're going to work for months. If you drop something on the street, it takes less than 24 hours. And that's horrible. It should not have to be that way. But Katie has, I think, the best t-shirt ever. It says, don't hate the researcher, hate the vuln. And that's really where it needs to go. Well, thank you so much for closing this out, Jake, putting this much work into it. I know you haven't been sleeping much. I know you guys have been really, really, really busy, so I greatly appreciate it.